Hi, Mon.
Hello.
Let's speak about your piece, Magnetic Room. Can you give maybe short background, like who commissioned, where it was played, and by whom it was played?
Yeah, so Electromagnetic Room was a work that was presented at the New Music Studio. And the New Music Studio is a Melbourne University program where it focuses on new music and music of the last 50 years. So it also, it encourages interdisciplinary works as well. So this was a work that I did with two collaborators, David Shea, who is a pianist and improviser, and Patrick Telfer, who is he's a sound technologist. So it was, and it came out of research that I have been doing in using hand gestures with computer vision to actually make changes to sound. So the whole idea was to have an instrument that's made up of the whole room, like not just the musicians in the room, but also the audience in the room and the room acoustics itself. So what we did is we had a piano, and it's a special piano as well. One of the things that I did a few years ago was to make an electromagnetic piano. So they are attachments that use electromagnets to play the strings of the piano so that it can sustain indefinitely. So we had a special piano which could be played in the traditional manner, but also in this augmented manner. And then we had 3 participant stations with computers, and basically any of the audience could come up and to the stations, and then with the use of different hand gestures, affect audio effects on the microphone captured sound of the piano. Yeah, that was the whole idea of the room.
Yes. So correctly, I understand that there was a one player. Basically, it was more improvised, right? And then there was 3 stations. So basically, there was like 4 agents, and these 3 agents are part of the audience. Everybody can come and play with.
Yeah, so 3 stations. So 3 at any time, any 3 of the audience could be part of it. One of the stations actually because one of the stations triggered the magnets on the piano, and then 2 of the other stations affected audio effects. So basically, none of the participants could really control the entire sound, and you couldn't really predict what the sound that would come up was, because it depended on everyone.
Yes. Okay, got it. But it's basically like right, there was this player. It was like a main agent.
It was a main agent that was the source of he was the primary source of the sound. So this pianist.
There was like 3 stations which can just adjust in real time some kind of sound parameters, right?
Yes, that's right. And that was output through a spatialized speaker. We had 6 speakers as well. So you had the acoustic piano plus the affected sound in 6 channels.
Got it. So 3 stations, right? You said that there is 3 stations. And what can impact each station? What kind of parameters?
It was different for each movement. So we had 5 movements in the work. And so we knew roughly what sort of textures were for each movement were. For example, one of the movements was about diaphragm. It was based on a book called Decay of the Angel, and it's about the steps by which a diva becomes human. And one of the steps was, one of the signs of the decay of the diva was sweating, lots of sweating. So we wanted sounds that had a lot of gliding and pitch shifting. So in that movement, for example, the movements of the audience would make everything pitch shift. It would create reverbs. And then in other movements, it would do other things. It would we would use, say, granular synthesis. So you would have the sound of the piano that goes through a granular synthesizer, and you'd have lots of these speckled, like granular textures, cloud textures. Yeah. So depending on the movement.
Got it. And right, this all three stations, there was manipulated by audience using hands, right? Because you've written this special computer vision program which understands the position of my hands, and based on
Yes.
position. And what is the main idea, right, of composition? You see, or main concept, what you want to like of whole piece?
Of the whole piece?
Sure.
It was really, I was brought up in a classical music tradition, but I guess, you know, going to concerts with young people, for example, you go to a bar, you go to a gig, you get involved in the music, right? It's a lot more immersive. You don't just sit down. So I really wanted to bring that sense of the audience being part of the whole atmosphere into I suppose a more of a classical music setting. So we had the piano, like the acoustic piano, but I wanted to have something where you could think of everyone as being part of that whole instrument. So the whole room was the instrument.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And what was there some kind of special message of the piece, or?
Not really. It was an experimental piece. No special message other than an invitation for people to just try something new and be part of something. And you know, we use hand gestures because it's quite natural. I think people understand. There's a cognitive sense that we think, okay, if you do movements this way, we feel that it should do this, make this type of sound somehow. So there's quite a naturalness to it. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And
it's also easier than using the body. Like we had choices of, okay, do we get people to make sounds with their hands, or do we get them to use their whole body? But actually with audiences, if you use the whole body, they might feel very self-conscious, because we're not dealing with dancers. Like, for example, if you work with dancers, you use the whole body, and that's what you do. But with people, because you're more self-conscious, so hands are a little bit easier. Yeah.
And this particular software you have created during COVID times, I understand, right?
Sorry?
This particular software, right, which understands my hands, and based on
Yeah. So
read from the sound from my hands, it creates sounds. You have created during COVID time, right?
Yeah, so the model itself, the computer vision model, is a Google model. It's called MediaPipe. So what I did was I created a program that would connect to that model on the local computers, and then convert that into the required MIDI based on which hand movement I was trying to track. Because you know, the AI models just give you your coordinates for like, I don't know, like 30 points of the hand or whatever it is. So you choose what you want to track, how you want to track it, how you want to map it to sound. So that was all coded, yeah, by myself.
And how sensorial or listening experience is created or was created through this piece?
It was varied. It was a piece that went over 45 minutes. So it started off we focus on the electromagnets of the piano. So it started off I don't know if you've ever heard a piano that is just triggered with electromagnets. There's no attack, because you don't play it. The magnets just pull the string. So it's a very sustained sound, almost like an organ. So we started the piece like that, like just with a sort of electromagnetic sustained sounds. And then And then it slowly, at the end, it was really quite dark. There was a lot of sub bass. People were lying down on the floor to feel the vibrations from the bass. Yeah, I don't know.
And you have 5 parts, right? Can you
Just 5.
can you explain the logic and the sequence?
Yeah. So as I said, it was based on a book. So it was based on a book called The Decay of the Angel. And by Mishima. Yukio Mishima is the author, and very broadly, we use this idea from Buddhist philosophy, that when a diva, which is like a demigod, starts to become human, there's a decay process, and there are 5 stages of that decay process. The first one, is the petals from their crown start to fall off. The second one is that they start to sweat a lot. The third one was their clothes become really dirty. I can't remember the fourth one, and then the fifth one is that everything starts to become quite dark. So we use these concepts which had to do actually with the body. It was about the decay of the body, essentially, as a metaphor for the decay of the spirit, and build the sounds around those ideas.
And what happened in each part, right? Whether there was sweetening part or
Sorry, what part?
what happened in each part, right? And that was the main question. And as I understand, there was you mentioned sweet, right? Then decay when you start sweeting, right?
Yes, yeah. So for example, that one had just had lots and lots of pitch shifting, like almost like the idea of being very liquid and not being stable.
Yes, yes. So
Yeah.
okay, the first part, what was?
First part was decay. So that one used just a lot of I can't remember, it was such a long time ago. I think what we did was we used a lot of echoing in that.
What?
So playing with the idea of decay, of something being echoes that just changed and became shorter and sort of morphed a bit. So a lot of decays in the first part. Yeah, diaphoresis, which was the sweating bit, was lots of pitch shifting and sort of very fluid, echoey reverb sounds. And then the third part was dirt. I think that was very granular. There was a lot of like speckled textures, more percussive textures. The fourth part, I cannot recall. It was dissatisfaction. Okay, it was dissatisfaction. So I think we experimented there just with lots of distortion and like pitch shifting delays. And then the last part was a lot of making sounds in the lower register and really heavy sounds in the lower part of the register.
Got it.
Yeah,
And
that was darkness.
and all performance, right? This by piano player was improvisation.
It was mainly improvised based on the structure.
Okay. And so you give to him some kind of instructions, right?
We gave the structure, but it's not. I didn't give him anything as set as a graphic score or even any score. Nothing like that. It was basically a set of just inspirational note writings, ideas, and he just went with that.
Okay, got it. So you give him some kind of the text, but not scores, right?
Yeah, no scores.
And what was the role of audience participation in this piece?
It really changed the sound. So, the combined effect of whatever they did had a huge effect on the sound, actually. So they were not an addition. It was an integral part of the whole piece.
Can you imagine the same piece, but without audience participation? What could it be? Would it work, right?
Not really. I think conceptually, the audience participation was really a key part of that work. And without that, it would have been, it would have been an improvised piece that you would see. Yes, it would have been a great piece because David Shea, who was the pianist, is a great pianist. He's a fantastic improviser. But that work revolved around the whole idea of the whole room being an instrument. So I think it would have been a very different piece without it.
And how it was right in the premiere? Is it the audience was quite active, or how they stand up and how they understand?
Yeah, actually, we were worried about that, right? Like how involved the audience would get. So actually, when I designed the piece, I had to build in contingencies for if there was no one at the station. What would happen? You have to build your default position. But in the actual performance, there was never a time when there wasn't someone at the stations. There was always someone. So that was good. But the performance was in the round, so all the performers and the stations were in the middle, and the audience was seated around. So in the beginning, they were all sitting down, and only after, I think, halfway through the performance, they started to really move around, stand around. They would sit on the floor, lie down on the floor. So that's when it, I think, started to get more interesting, when the audience actually became part of that physical space where the performers were.
And where's such kind of surprises regarding audience input, right? Because I assume that you can a lot of you can pre-imagine, right? You can pre-imagine, okay, partly maybe how the sound will came from this piano, but I think it's very, at least for me, it would be very hard to pre-imagine how piece will be shaped by audience, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of faith that it would just happen, and I think that's the beauty also of having an improvised piece, because David, the performer, can respond to what he's hearing. So it's like a feedback loop. The audience is making the sound as well, and he's listening to the sound and responding to it. So yeah, it's not something that you can plan very well, but at the same time, it's something that gives you a lot of freedom to compensate for the sound that you get. So if the sound gets too dense, he can pull it back.
Got it.
And vice versa. Yeah.
And was there some kind of musical surprise for you?
Not so much surprise. I think roughly I had an idea that it would sound like that. I think in hindsight, actually, I would have made the piece maybe more. So when you map gestures to sound, there's always a design issue. How obvious do you make that? Do you make it so that the gesture and sound mapping is really obvious, so that the audience understands that, okay, this gesture makes this effect to the sound? Or do you make it not obvious at all? So it's always like, okay, how obvious do you want it? How not obvious do you want it? And I think in retrospect, I would have made it more complex and less obvious. Yeah. It's a hard one, because sometimes if the audience can't hear the difference that they're making, they also don't understand, and then they get disengaged. So yeah, it's always a design issue.
Got it. And and how you spoke with the audience afterwards? How it was this experience? Is it somehow changed their perception, or towards the piece, or towards the classical music, or?
I think that the audience that came were the ones who were interested in experimental music, so they were very receptive to it. I think for many of them, it was the first time they had seen something like that. So I think the novelty of it was really interesting. Yeah.
How they feel more connected to the piece during due to their direct engagement, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think more, definitely more connected, especially, and not just for the people who came up and participated, but I think for the people who didn't necessarily participate but could see other people participating and could walk around them,
Okay, got it.
sit around them. Yeah, it definitely felt like a more, I suppose you feel like you're a part of it rather than watching something.
Okay, got it. Got it. And in this piece, you use this your instrument handmade effect. And what was the role of that?
So that was basically to track the hands, the movement of the hands, and then turn it into information that the digital sound processing could use. So I think for that one, I use OS, Open Sound Control,
Mhm.
as the protocol, and to network the 3 different computers to the
Yes,
one main computer. Yeah.
yes. And um, can you imagine the same piece but without that software, right? With engaging people, but in a different way, right? I don't know. Let's say in more analog way, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think absolutely. It's a concept. The idea of people being part of one instrument, so this idea of remote networking, distributed sound, can definitely work in analog. I think the computer vision it's a tool. It's like any other tool. It's how you use it, and there are many tools that can do the same thing.
Yes, got it. And what kind of softwares and hardwares was used in that piece, right? There was piano, right? And then there was a
Yeah.
lot of sensors.
There were the magnets that sit on top of the piano, and there was obviously microphones, speakers, the computer stations used. We were using the computer vision software on the browser, and then all the information went to a central computer which used Max MSP for processing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you right, you said that you choose improviser, right? It's a basic idea. You improviser and you give him a lot of freedom and only like text instructions. But can you imagine the same piece, right? But
Mm.
where it was strictly pre-written scores, right?
Strictly pre-written, absolutely. I think so. I think then you would have to control the participant input,
Yes.
because then you don't have the ability to respond as much.
Yes.
So I think it's definitely possible.
Yes. And can you imagine what could be different then?
I think you could make really specific effects, for example, that the participant station, like at this specific moment, this will be the effect that happens. And that could be actually really, really effective. Yeah, it just has to be very much planned and timed. But it could be, yeah, something which would give you a lot more precise control over the sound at any one time.
Good. And what up? Still, right? This understand that there was 5 sections, and at least you programmed something for this audience engagement, and you choose instruments. Maybe what were some kind of basic compositional principles that you used in this piece?
Um, it's hard to say because it was mainly improvised. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's really not a traditional composition. The principles were basically okay. Textures like our first priority was textures. Yeah, I think that was the main guiding principle behind not just the way the piano was played, but also the audio effects that the hand movements were making.
And how you selected those? What was the idea of selection or sequence of those? Because
Yeah,
it was
that was
changing, right? From part to part. It wasn't like they one sound station play only that, but and through entire piece. But it could be the case that they changing, right? During one part, I manipulate. It sounds completely different from the second part, right? Correctly, I understand.
Yeah. Based on the movement. So with the audio effects on the stations, it was pretty much the same movement to sound mapping for the whole movement, that whole section of the piece. But then, of course, what happens with the participant would change it, and it would depend on what two different people were doing at the same time. Because you have a chain of effects. So one effect from one person will affect the sound of the effect on the other person.
And how was your cooperation with piano player, with the improviser? How it was during creation of the piece, right? Have you? Oh, there was some kind of, I don't know. Did you consult or did you show or how it was, or just?
Yeah, we had definitely a few rehearsals, but we have collaborated, together quite a few times, so we sort of know each other's language. We had a few sessions where we had to mock up the audio effects. So, I was pretending to be the audience, and so he could listen to what that would do to the sound.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what was the process of composing this piece? What kind of stages you go through and how long it took?
It actually, once we had the idea and the concept, it didn't take too long. It took a while to get to a structure. It took a while to figure out the technicalities, the technology. So technology, sometimes it takes a while. I had to decide what system to use. There were a few decisions to be made because like the computer tracking can be done through many platforms. We can do it through the browser. We can do it through different programs. So it was, trying to figure out, okay, what hardware we have and what CPU we have. So, how much movement can we track? Because it's quite processing intensive. Computer vision is quite processing intensive. So if you track too many things and get it too complex, it actually becomes really slow. So that, a lot of fussing around with that. But actual nitty composition, it's something that, because of the improvised nature, didn't take too long. We probably had a couple of weeks before the performance where we rehearsed and sort of settled on some sort of structure with like the rhythmic elements, the melodic elements that, Dave roughly knew what he was going to do.
Yes, got it. But do I correctly understand, right? So in the first, it was like a concept. Basically, you thought a lot so that you develop the concept. As then was this technical decisions, and then there was these technical implementations, and then there was rehearsals, improving, and then there was performance, right? Or it was in different way.
No, that was pretty much it.
And the last question: what would you suggest for other composers who have never engaged audience but they would like to, right? Free suggestions or free learnings from, let's say, from your experience on this piece.
Oh, okay. I think there's a lot of artwork now that I see. Participatory art has become more and more popular, right, over the last 10, 20 years. Not just in sound, in visual arts, in installations and everything. So I think people are a lot more used to it. I think you can't just use it as a gimmick. I see sometimes works where, you know, there's a whole composed orchestral or whatever chamber music ensemble piece going, and then, you know, sometimes it has some mobile phone sounds and things like that. I think those are hard to, when the sound that the audience makes is just like not an integral part of the piece, it can be difficult, I think, to engage the audience, because people tend to just want to sit down and just watch. So yeah, unless the participation is so necessary to that work, I think, yeah, it's hard to find that, how to make it absolutely necessary to the work, rather than something that you just add on.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, it was my pleasure to interview you.
Oh no, thank you so much. It was very nice to meet you, and yeah, hopefully keep in touch.